So, to piggyback off his, how far of the ripples you mentioned do you go? Like, if you start at a change in the Civil War, you know, before you're down to a quagmire of trying to keep all the facts and all your
too many butterflies at that point.
But that's the problem, is it becomes a self-paradox. It just keeps going and going. Like, you can't, you know, it's like someone's mentioned that the Spanish-American War might not have happened. Who knows what would have happened with the Crimean War? I mean, once you place that one, which is actually what makes it fascinating.
Yeah. But that's a big change rather than a little change. A lot of times authors like what I chose. I chose a very little change, a very specific event, a very specific event by one person one time. Actually letting the South get away with secession, that's big stuff.
Well, I mean, you take that one edge, but then of course you take the theory that leads to the surface fleet that leads to U.S. So I mean, either way, it still goes.
Well, when I trace its propagation at the time it happens, rather than say this happened in 1865. What's it look like 50 years ago?
Well, as someone who plays an alternate history, I'm not very good at writing it. I've written a fanfic about what if JFK had lived. None of you want to read that. None of you. Buy these, don't even look for that because I'm not. But you have to kind of, as God in the notebook, you get to decide where those ripples stop. Armchair arguing over a beer, yeah. I mean, you can, Alexandria Burns, you know.
That's fascinating. I never thought of that.
And, you know, Dogger Bank doesn't happen. I mean, you know, or what, I mean, yeah, it just doesn't matter. But as God on the page, you get to have the power to say, South doesn't secede, has no impact anywhere outside the continental U.S. Which isn't true because it would, I mean, a third-rate power splits up. I mean, people are going to take advantage. And that's the best way to look at it because, like you said, once the waves get too wild, you'll go nuts. I mean, it's...
There's also a way of like sort of self-repairing. For example, just with if George Washington had done that monarch thing or whatever, you know, there's a good argument that eventually America would have followed the example of Europe and just slowly weeded out the monarchs and started replacing it with, you know, more democratic things, you know. But then you could say, well, the reason they started doing that was because of the example of the American Revolution, you know, so it's, but history may write itself eventually.
Well, have you all heard the Society of Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Which was created at that time. There were a number of
James Roseman.
Yeah, and his officers were interested in making him king. Yeah. And the society, Cincinnatus, was a Roman emperor who had been, not an emperor. He was a general. He had been brought from the field, pushing his plow field, to lead the armies. He won. They wanted to make him emperor, but he went back to his plow. So,
in fact, the British quote him as an example, saying if he repeats the example of Cincinnatus, George Washington was one of the greatest men in history.
Maybe, yeah.
That's what the British guys say.
Right, but the society was created at the time of George Washington to discourage all of his generals who wanted to make him king.
I never know.
Well, and one bad thing too is you're talking about it Washington, John Postal and taking over. South Carolina would probably still be in Civil War because that's all the war was. South Virginia, it was interceding. I don't like you. Hail to the king, baby. And you, hell no, I'm an American. Well, I'm gonna lie and wait outside your house and shoot you when you go feed the pigs. And that'll piss her off. She'll get her brother, shoot me. Joe will get mad, he'll shoot her.
No, I don't get mad.
And then we keep going and go, but
I use nuclear weapons.
Communication's so bad. I mean, you know, we'll be back 20 years from now. And we were not going to care. And but the pygmies and people like that second tier of revolutionary leaders, wouldn't be there to put the pieces back together.
On the repairing the ripples, like you were saying, technology is really good that way. Some people say, what if this person didn't invent this? Or what if someone didn't do that? A lot of times, there are some exceptions, but very often what happens is that the same advancements in science and craftsmanship and ability and metallurgy are happening everywhere, and it's only happened to be the first person. For example, we know something called the Bessemer process, but it's also the Kelly process, because it was invented almost exactly the same time in Europe. We have Orville Wright running flight, maybe, but everyone was pretty much putting an airplane stuff together, and there's only arguments who gets first. In fact, do you know that Smithsonian was allowed or given by the heirs of Orville Wright, I think the widows, of the rights to the plane, if and only if they can keep the plane. If and only if they never ever propose that someone else other than the Wrights were the first ones to fly heavier than air. As soon as they say that, they forfeit the plane. So you will never see Smithsonian saying that.
And what's comical about that is one of the Regents was a competitor of the Wright brothers, who actually probably beat them flying around, I think around Virginia Beach or Hampton Roads.
He crashed into the river.
Yeah. So I mean,
He didn't actually take flight.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where he could make a case where, you know, you flew for 30 seconds. I flew for, 15, so what's the difference? So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, and that's kind of ironic.
They didn't crash land at the end of the 30 seconds.
But that's ironic that, Jim points that out.
One of the technology examples of exceptions is the phonograph. Edison created the, I said, if this thing vibrates when I make this, what if I deliberately made it vibrate, would it play the noise back out again? No one ever actually thought that. In fact, he wasn't sure it would work, so he gave the technician, the guy who was actually a craftsman who was crafting it, the instructions to build this thing without ever telling him what it was. And so when the guy tried to test it, he heard his voice coming back at him, he freaked out.
What you got there? We got one more.
Alternate history has kind of exploded as a genre over the last 10 years. I mean, you've got websites like alternatehistory.com, you've got authors like Eric Flint, Harry Turtledove, and we've even got a TV show on Amazon.com based off Man in the High Castle. Where does the genre go from here? Do you see it continuing to grow, or...?
This is the moment. This is it.
You do know that it's a very old genre. The Romans actually wrote an alternate history about what would happen if Alexander the Great attacked in their direction. And other people have written histories in France after Napoleon got whacked. What if Napoleon had won? They wrote those alternate histories in. So it is an old genre.
It is, but I think you're right, and I think like everything else, I think it's going to go more non-Western. What if Ali had become the heir to Muhammad? What if the Medes don't get restored in Japan? And there's dozens of pivot points in Chinese history going back to the first emperor. So I mean, I think it'll go more non-Western. Do I know how well that will fly in 2015? I'm interested to see it because that's not one of my strong points. But I think a lot of the really good dirtsmen Beall in America, and what if Hitler had invaded Britain and all that. So I'm interested to see it. I'm just not sure how. But that's the next logical step. It'll go more non-Western. I think that's going to be fascinating to see.
Right, one of the ones I've been waiting to see that I've never seen anybody tackle on a big scale is the question of what if Hannibal had gone ahead and sacked Rome and enslaved his people and destroyed it entirely at the end of the First Punic War?
Someone actually wrote that. It was actually a short story about.
Yeah, I'm looking for like a series of novels. That would have changed the entirety of civilization.
The premise was that Scipio was not rescued by his son in the first battle when Hannibal came in to Italy. He was wounded. The son got him out heroically. Paul had to fight his way through to get him. He was prevented, and so there was no one around with enough clout to say, "We're not going to fight Hannibal on the field. We're going to stay behind our walls." Instead, they fought. They went out to fight him, and they lost the Punic War. That's been written, actually.
Yeah, that's a short story. I mean, you don't encompass 3,000 years of history in a short story.
I officially tagged you in. Go and get the word processor. I'll buy it.
Keystrokes are
Somebody else will have to pay for it, but I'll buy it. I mean, I work for the county. I'll have it in. It's about 5 till. I know y'all have other panels to get to. Thank y'all for coming out. We'll be around, Dealer's Room, other panels, etc.